jobs. Just 2 decades ago, we had nearly 20 million Americans in the manufacturing sector. Today, it's probably closer to 11 million. That means some 9 million Americans that once had jobs in the manufacturing sector are no longer employed in that sector. They need to be re-educated either for advanced manufacturing technologies or in other sectors. And so the labor force is constantly evolving, and one of the roles of the federal government through the Department of Education and the Department of Labor and Commerce is to provide that re-education necessary as one of the old manufacturing technologies moves, dies out, and new ones come along so that the labor force is able to move into those new jobs. And so you see the combination of education and labor. These things work together. On the educational side, it's been shown many, many times that an education really needs to start in pre-kindergarten. Yet, one of the effects of sequestration, together with the government shutdown, was a significant reduction in pre-kindergarten education. In my district, some 6,000 young people were unable to participate in the Head Start program, not just for 16 days, but for the many days out ahead. So they will enter kindergarten substantially behind their peers, providing an anchor to the economy as they move through their educational process, quite possibly becoming one of the high majority or the high percentage of students that drop out of high school. And so as you move down this Make It in America agenda, we come down to one that's at a fundamental investment, and that's the infrastructure system. We have a very high unemployment rate, no doubt about it. One of the ways to immediately employ Americans is to build the foundation for economic growth. These are all part of the foundation for economic growth. This is the concrete and steel when we talk about infrastructure. These are the roads, the airports, the railroads, the mass transportation systems, the sanitation systems, the water systems. And so infrastructure becomes a critical part of any of the efforts that we need to make to rebuild America, to provide the foundation, and to put Americans back to work. There's some very interesting research that's come out of this. And here's a piece of it. For every dollar invested in infrastructure, $1.57 is pumped back into the economy. So if, for example, the federal government were to undertake the robust infrastructure program that the President put forth a year ago and reiterated in his State of the Union speech this last January, actually February, and we passed legislation as he wanted to put $50 billion additional into the infrastructure program, the economy would not only be spending the dollar, it would be getting back $1.57 for every one of those $50 billion that the President wanted to put into America's infrastructure. Men and women would be working. The economy would begin to move forward more rapidly, and we would begin to see the kind of economic growth that this nation needs to have, that the men and women that are unemployed or those that are seeking better jobs would want to have, and we would be laying the foundation for future economic growth. So we must keep this in mind. There are several things that can be done in this regard. One of them you just heard about during the brief interruption when the Rules Committee came here to put before this House tomorrow and the days ahead the Water Resource Development Act. This used to be a biennial legislation that Congress would pass every 2 years to put in place the water resources, the development of levees, transportation systems such as the locks and the rivers and the channels, the ports, other kinds of water transportation systems. So you had water, you had sanitation systems, you had levees. All of these critically important infrastructure projects are in the Water Resources Development Act. It's been 5 years since there's been a Water Resource Development Act, but we have a chance now to push forward in this House of Representatives in the next few days an extremely important infrastructure piece of legislation. The good news is it's a good chance we'll do it. The bad news is it's inadequately funded. There's not sufficient money in that program to actually build the kind of things that we must have. So what are we going to do? One of the solutions was again proposed by the President in his infrastructure program that he presented to Congress that has really not been acted on yet, and that was an infrastructure bank. A bank that's been in existence in Europe for almost 30 years now, one in which it's a public-private partnership in which the government invests money, private investors can also invest. That money would then be available for those kinds of infrastructure projects that are cash flow projects. For example, a sanitation system, a toll road, a toll bridge, an airport, a water system. All of these kinds of infrastructures have fees associated with them, so there's a cash flow that's generated sufficient to pay off the loan that is made available through the infrastructure bank. Such a program has been introduced here in the House of Legislation since at least the early 1990s. Doesn't exist. Never been passed. Although every year one or another member of the House of Representatives, I know Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro has introduced this for at least the last 15 years, but never acted upon. And you have to wonder why. This seems to me to be eminently wise that we would create an infrastructure bank. The federal government can borrow money today. A 10-year note was just over, I think, 2.6% for a 10-year note. That's really cheap money. Borrow that money, put it in this bank, loan it out at 2.8% to various cities, counties, water systems, and build the infrastructure. That's cheap money. Gives us a chance to get the economy growing, employ people, build the foundation for economic growth, and raise taxes. Not by increasing the tax rate, but by people paying taxes because they're now working. What a novel idea. People who work pay taxes, just as we ought to be doing. So this is the couple of ideas about how we can move the economy